Under the gloomy light of the Forrester estate, quiet seemed heavier than usual, pressing down on everyone who had gathered there since the truth was revealed. Electra had always been known for her composure and strength, which she portrayed even at her most vulnerable moments, but tonight was different. The air around her appeared shattered, each breath tinged with shock and the agony of betrayal. When Will's words fell from his lips, nonchalant yet cruel, she felt something inside her collapse. Her chest felt hollow, as if the foundation she had built her life on had collapsed in seconds. Thomas stood nearby, his normally harsh and calculated demeanor softening as he observed her. He could see raw emotion flickering in her eyes, which she fought valiantly to conceal. He'd seen people betrayed before. He'd betrayed and been betrayed in more ways than he could count, but seeing Electra in this state was something totally different. Her fragility hit him, bringing to the surface a part of himself he had long suppressed. Electra's fingers trembled as she tried to keep her glass firmly on the table. The room around her blurred, and sounds faded into the distance. All she could hear were those words reverberating in her mind. Will, the man she had believed she could rely on, had shattered every illusion she had held. She muttered nearly inaudibly, "Don't talk to me again." The words weren't loud, but they were cutting and jagged, packed with sorrow that Thomas knew all too well. He took a step closer, unsure whether she needed comfort or space, but drawn to her by a deeper want. Electra turned to face him, her eyes moist and fierce. "He can't do this to me. He does not get to come into my life, promising me everything, and then destroy it with one truth. How could he?" Her voice cracked and she pressed a hand on her lips, attempting to contain the sob that threatened to escape. Thomas did not respond immediately. He knew better than to give her platitudes and hollow reassurances. Instead, he simply stood there, his presence unchanging and his silence intentional. He knew that sometimes quiet was more comfortable than words. Finally, he spoke softly and steadily. Because people like him never realize the consequences of their acts until it is too late. They break things they cannot repair. They harm the individuals they are supposed to safeguard. And they leave wounds that do not fade easily. Electra blinked, astonished by the depth of comprehension in his tone. It wasn't pity. It was recognition, the voice of someone who had been there and experienced it. And for a brief while, she let herself lean into that knowledge. She relaxed her shoulders slightly, decreasing her guard by an inch. "Why does it hurt so much?" she asked quietly, her voice shaking. "I should be stronger than this. I should have known better." Thomas shakes his head. Strength does not mean not feeling pain. It is about survival. And you will. I'm sure you will. For a long time they stood in quiet, with the hum of the city outside the windows filling the space between them. Electra recalled all the time she had protected Will, persuaded herself that his sins were forgiven, that his imperfections were mere shadows of something larger. She had believed in him even when others cautioned her not to, and now those warnings repeated like bitter memories in her head. She returned her gaze to Thomas, scanning his features. "Why are you here? Why do you care?" Thomas tilted his head and met her eyes without hesitation. "Because I know how it feels to be left in the aftermath of someone else's falsehoods. I understand what it's like to question everything, including yourself. And I would not wish that on anyone, including you." The candor in his statements surprised her. For so long she had regarded Thomas as dangerous and unpredictable, a man who wore his ambition like armor and rarely revealed what lay beneath. But now he was open and raw in a way she hadn't expected, and at that moment, she realized how much she needed someone to rely on, even if it was him. Her lips trembled as she murmured, "I don't know what to do now." "Then don't do anything right now," Thomas said softly. "Don't make decisions, don't force yourself to move on, and don't pretend you're fine. Just breathe. Take one step at a time. The rest will follow." The simplicity of his advice soothed her like a salve. She perched on the edge of the sofa, hands tightly clutched in her lap, attempting to ground herself. Thomas sat beside her at a safe distance, close enough to offer support but far enough to respect her personal space. Electra closed her eyes and allowed the tears to flow freely this time. She didn't care how it appeared or if her vulnerability made her appear weak. She had kept herself together for far too long, and now the weight of everything threatened to break her. Thomas reached out slowly and softly placed his hand over hers. She did not draw away. Instead, she allowed the warmth of his touch tell her that she wasn't alone in the storm. They stayed there for hours. The night became darker, and the world outside changed, yet time seemed to stand still within that room. Electra's breathing eventually calmed, and her tears turned into soft sniffles. Thomas didn't push or insist. He merely stayed, his presence serving as an anchor amid her sea of upheaval. As the clock ticked past midnight, Electra muttered, "Thank you." Thomas offered a slight nod, his countenance gentle. "You don't need to thank me. Please don't shut me out." She gazed at him, her lips twitching in a tiny smile. "You don't make it easy to trust you." "I know," Thomas confessed. "But I am not him. I will not be him." The earnestness in his voice struck her once more, leaving her dumbfounded. She had no idea what the future contained or if she was ready to let someone else in. But for the first time since the betrayal, she felt a glimmer of optimism. The anguish was still acute and unyielding, but it no longer seemed insurmountable. With Thomas by her side, she realized she could handle it. She could make it. And perhaps, just maybe, she could make her way through the rubble to something stronger. The darkness gave way to dawn, light streaming through the curtains and lighting the room in mellow gold. Electra spread her fingers beneath Thomas's hand, not jerking away but immersing herself in the warmth. She took a big breath and spoke more steadily than previously. "He does not get to define me. Not anymore." Thomas smiled slightly, his eyes sparkling with calm pride. "That's the Electra I know." For the first time in a long time she believed it as well. Electra rarely moved from her position on the sofa as the hours passed. The lamp's weak brightness cast shadows across her face, making her appear delicate yet unbreakable. Her thoughts spun in circles, drawing her back to the beginning, to the first time Will smiled at her in a way that made her think he was different. She had been so anxious to believe in him, in something true, that she had missed the flaws that had existed all along. She remembered the dinners he'd prepared, the late-night walks they'd taken while he held her hand as if he'd never let go. He had murmured promises into her ear and said he could see forever in her eyes. She remembered how her heart beat when he said those words, and how she had believed, despite her better sense, that someone had finally recognized her for who she was, not simply what she could offer. Those memories now seemed poisonous. Every joke they'd shared turned into a mocking. Every tender moment became harsh, like shards of glass slicing into her chest. She hated herself for not recognizing it sooner, and for loving someone who did not deserve it. Thomas noted the distant expression in her eyes and said softly, "Where did you go just now?" Electra let out a nervous breath. "Return to the beginning. Back when I thought he was everything I had been looking for. Now I feel like I was living a lie." "You weren't lying," Thomas said gently. "He was. That is on him, not you." She shook her head and pressed her palms to her temples. "But I let him. I let him get into every aspect of my life. I supported him to everyone, even when they warned me to be careful. I assumed love meant sticking by him even when things didn't make sense. And look where that got me." Her voice broke, and she let out the sob she had been keeping in. Thomas quickly sought for her and pulled her into his arms. She resisted for a little moment before slumping against his chest, sobs seeping into his shirt. He gripped her tightly, placing his chin lightly on the top of her head. "You trusted him. That is not a weakness, Electra. That is who you are. You see the good in people even if they do not deserve it. Do not punish yourself for being human." His words hung in the air, wrapping around her like a shield. She wanted to believe him and ignore the voice in her head that said she had been silly and naive. She wanted to drown in his arms and forget, if only for a moment, how much it hurt. The cries became more intense, raw and unrestrained, years of suppressed anxieties and doubts gushing out all at once. She'd always carried herself as if she were untouchable, a lady capable of handling anything. But tonight, with her world destroyed, she allowed herself to break down in front of others. Thomas massaged slow circles across her back, his patience limitless. He did not advise her to stop crying or urge her to move on. He merely held her till her breathing began to calm and the tears faded into quiet hiccups. When she eventually pulled back, her eyes were swollen and red, but she had a weird lightness about her, as if letting go of the weight of her grief had provided her with a brief relief. "Do you think it ever goes away?" she inquired, her voice husky. "The pain?" Thomas considered for a bit before responding. "It does not disappear. But things change. One day it won't be the first thing you think about when you wake up or the last thing you think about before going to bed. One day it will simply be part of your story, and you'll discover that it no longer defines you." She studied him, astounded by the insight in his remarks. "You sound like you've lived it." "I have," he said. "More than once." His glance flickered with something unsaid, a recollection he wasn't ready to reveal. But his quiet was enough. He understood loss, betrayal, and the difficulty of putting yourself back together. Electra put her arms over herself, as if to keep from unraveling again. "Thomas, I loathe him. I despise that he made me believe. I detest that he still has control over me." "Then take it back," Thomas stated forcefully. "Don't give him that authority again. He does not deserve to dictate how you feel or what you believe about yourself. He had already taken plenty. Don't let him take any more." His conviction struck her. She wished to be that strong, to rise beyond the devastation Will had left behind. Nonetheless, the wound remained fresh, bleeding with each thought. But maybe Thomas was correct. Perhaps strength was more than just pretending she was okay. Perhaps it was about refusing to let the betrayal define her. The night went on, and Electra found herself sharing Thomas' secrets she hadn't told anybody else. She described the first time she and Will fought, and how he apologized profusely but never changed. She talked about the lies she had swept aside, the contradictions she had overlooked because she was frightened of losing him. Each confession felt like peeling away another layer of shame, revealing the reality she'd hidden even from herself. Thomas listened without judgment, his gaze fixed on hers. He did not interrupt or try to fix her story. He simply let her speak and unravel in her own way. When she went silent, weary from the release, Thomas leaned back and whispered, "You deserved so much better than that." The simplicity of the phrase struck her harder than she expected. For so long, she had questioned her worth, wondering if she had asked for or expected too much. But seeing him say it so confidently gave her hope, if only for a moment, that she wasn't the problem. The morning crept closer, bathing the sky in pink and gold. Electra slumped back on the sofa, her body tired but her heart unusually light. She looked at Thomas, who was still sitting next her, his stance relaxed but his gaze vigilant, as if ready to support her at any time. "Why are you doing this?" she inquired softly. He raised an eyebrow. "Doing what?" "Being here. Join me. You could have left hours ago and I wouldn't blame you. But you stayed." Thomas's gaze relaxed. "Because I know what it's like to break, and I understand how important it is to have someone there when you do. You don't forget the folks who sit beside you in the dark. And maybe I don't want you to forget me." Electra's breath hitched at the sincerity in his voice. She wasn't sure what to say, or whether she was ready to face the prospect that his presence meant more than just comfort. However, for the first time in a long time, the prospect of not being alone did not frighten her. She gave him a tiny, exhausted grin. "I don't think I will." The sun finally appeared over the horizon, sending golden light around the room. For Electra, it felt symbolic, the beginning of something new, even if she didn't know what it was yet. She still felt betrayed, but with Thomas by her side, it wasn't as painful. It felt livable. And maybe that's enough for now.